Hey everybody, this is Chris, MTGO's RexDart, and this is the deck tech for my first place Classic Quarter Invitational Qualifier deck here. This is, I call it Excalibur. It is a Bant fish deck, and just to explain, fish is a term that encompasses all blue-based aggro control decks in Vintage, and terminology applies in Classic as well. And the basic idea is to be able to deploy a lot of pressure and have some counter magic and other disruption to back that pressure up. And you'll see here that mine is a variant on what was called at one point Noble Fish in Vintage, and the difference here is the Noble Hierarch. I think especially when there aren't Moxes available in the format, as is the case with Classic, that having a little extra mana up front never hurts, and the Cold-Eyed Selkie pairs quite nicely with the Noble Hierarch against blue opponents to give me a lot of card advantage. I decided to run some Swords to Plowshares here to have some removal, and Brainstorm, you get to play 4 of these in Classic, which you don't in Vintage, which is quite nice. So again, I'm kind of coming at this format from a legacy perspective, so a lot of my card choices were informed by the kind of things that I would play in Legacy, but I had to look at the Classic metagame and try to balance it a little bit for that. So anyways, 4 Tarmogoyfs I think was obvious here because they are just the most efficient beaters available to me. I decided to run Stoneforge Mystic, and that's why I gave the deck the name Excalibur, because there was a Bant deck in Legacy a little while back, probably a couple of years, that ran Stoneforge Mystics for swords and Batterskull, and that was called Excalibur, and so I took the inspiration from that. So I ran 3 Stoneforge Mystics. The Stoneforge Batterskull plan gives you a way to close out the game rather quickly, although you're not too worried about opposing aggro matchups other than workshops, which was a workshop aggro, which was a problem for totally other reasons. But we'll look at how I dealt with that with the sideboard in a minute. But it is just a very efficient way to close out the game quickly. Mana Drain, I ran one of these, thinking that I could power out Jace, Batterskull, cast a sword and equip, that kind of play, but I probably should have just run Spell Pierce here for all the experience I had in the tournament. Convinced me that Mana Drain is just not worth running here, so this will probably get replaced with Spell Pierce in future variations of the deck. I ran, as aforementioned, the 3 Cold-Eyed Selkies, which are quite nice when I'm playing against another blue deck. A couple of Knight of the Reliquaries. If I could have found a way to run a third, I probably would have, just because the land tutoring ability is something that I could have exploited a lot more. But they are great, efficient beaters, especially given that I'm running 4 Wastelands, Strip Mine, ton of fetch lands here. So Trigon Predator is one of those things that's kind of unique to Classic and Vintage. He's not as big in Legacy, obviously, because you don't always have targets for him, but you generally do in Classic and Vintage. Now, he's not eating opposing Moxes and that sort of business all the time in this format, in Classic, but he's really solid against workshops, and he wins me a lot of games against workshops in this very tournament. And of course, the ability to play him potentially off the second turn, off a Noble Hierarch if I'm not otherwise disrupted, is super awesome with him. And of course, in a pinch, he is blue, so he pitches to Force of Will, so he's not like totally dead in the matchups where he doesn't himself shine. Usually, I found that either the Selkies or the Trigon Predators, one of the two, I was wanting to let go and bring stuff in the sideboard, but that's not really that bad a position to be in. But I definitely wanted to have both of these main deck, and Trigon Predator's main deck was definitely very helpful in the event. Vendilion Click. Everybody, of course, now knows how powerful that's been in Legacy over the past couple of years, and I thought it should be pretty powerful here. It's a 3-power flyer for one thing, and Noble Hierarchs make it potentially an even faster clock than that. And it has really solid disruption ability, and so it's good against combo, and it's fairly good when I just need to put a quick clock against somebody before they can rebuild their hands, such as in those combo matches. I ran 2 Jace. I'm not sure about whether it was right to run a couple Jaces even in this deck. He's a little high mana, so I found myself sometimes tempted to board him out against decks that had an opposing mana denial plan, but he does just so totally lock up the game, and it is nice to be able to legend rule the opponent's Jace when necessary. And that did come up during the tournament, and obviously he's powerful with my huge number of fetch lands here at helping me dig for answers. Which clearly is something this deck needs to do. I mean, I'm trying to put out some pressure here, but I don't have anything super awesome broken going on in this deck, so I'm going to need to be able to ride whatever pressure I can deploy to victory, and that means I'm going to need to find answers, whether that is counter magic, removal, what have you. So having 4 brainstorms and then a couple of Jace here, I thought was pretty reasonable, and I imagine I'll stick with a couple of Jace in this list for a little while because it wasn't terrible, but I'm not 100% sure if that's optimal. There, of course, is the Batterskull, and then I ran 4 Force of Will. Some people in Legacy do run 3 and run the other in the board, but I thought there was too many broken plays in Classic on turn 1 potentially for me to just run 3. So I ran the full complement, and I thought that was obviously correct because there were a lot of matchups where I found myself basically having to mull 2 Force of Will on the draw or else have no chance of winning. As far as the mana base is concerned, I went with a basic Forest. I definitely wanted so I could fetch it with Noble Hierarch. I did that quite a bit. And basic Island, I thought I would sometimes want to fetch since I had a fair number of double blue here. And I think that was correct. I didn't miss having like a basic Plains. I never really was in a situation where I needed to fetch that up. So my decision to main deck Caracas I think was correct. It disrupts the Oath decks, although I didn't have any of those matchups, but it also can help me fight in show and tell. And in a pinch I could bounce back a V-click and then replay it. So I was fine with that. I've got 7 fetch lands here, which seemed about right. It played pretty well. 3 Trops, a Savannah, 2 Tundras. Again, all those duels played pretty well. And the 4 Wastelands and 1 Strip Mine, helping my attack my opponent's special lands, such as the Mishra's Workshops in those matchups, and Bazaar of Baghdad if I had played Dredge, but again I managed to dodge Dredge during the event. But just helped the mana denial plan. And now since I do have such a pronounced mana denial plan, and Trigon Predator kind of backs that up too because he attacks their artifact mana, that just tells me even more. I probably should have been running something like Spell Pierce instead of the mana drain here. Let's take a look at the sideboard. Now this kind of deck often plays in Vintage. It will play 4 main deck Null Rods, sometimes 2 to 4 in that range, but a lot of times 4. And I decided that because this format did not have actual Moxes in it, and the only deck that I really knew I wanted that effect against was the Workshop Aggro Ravager Affinity decks, that I would just play these in the sideboard. When Vintage comes online later in the year, I imagine that this will all be retooled in some sense, and I will probably be running these or Null Rods in the main deck. I was concerned because this was an open tournament. You didn't have to qualify or anything. That there may be people running some rogue budget decks, such as Burn or Goblins. And so I included these 3 chills in the sideboard. The only time I actually got a chance to bring them in the event was against a Goblin Charbelcher deck where I just didn't have anything else to bring in against it. And I had stuff that was dead in my main deck. So I brought in the chills just to hurt a couple of his spells, such as the Manamorphose, but I mean, it didn't do much in the event. But if I was playing in a classic event that was wide open, I think this is something I would continue to find room for. I probably would not play it in the Invitational, where I wouldn't expect anybody to be playing Burn or Goblins. But Steel Sabotage is popular in Vintage. I decided to go with it here, although Nature's Claim is also popular. But this does require me to hold up mana, so in that sense it's a little bit worse. But I like the flexibility here that I could either counter the spell or bounce the artifact. And I was fairly happy with Steel Sabotage's performance. GTA was for creature mirrors, which there just really weren't a lot of, but I think I will always find room for this in the 75, just for those situations. Since I am running Stoneforge Mystic, there's really no reason not to hedge in that regard. And here was my dredge hate. I had 2 Grafdigger's Cage and 2 Tormod's Crypt. Grafdigger's Cage also doubles as hate for Oath decks. Tormod's Crypt is just here because it's free, and I'm obviously going to be a little more constrained on mana. Again, there's no Moxes in this format, so something that costs 0 is perfect there. And thankfully, I'm not bringing this in the same matches where I would be bringing in Stony Silence, or else that would be a pretty wicked nombo. And I ran 1 Linvala, Keeper of Silence here, just kind of against any other sort of rogue combos that might be in that involved that. Although it was fine to bring in, I did bring it in against Show and Tell because it would shut down an opposing Grizzlebrand. Probably one of the most effective ways to do that, since it shuts down his activated ability. But mostly this was here to shut down, like I said, rogue combos, or in case anybody was playing something funky like elves or what have you. So a lot of the sideboard was dictated by the fact that the qualifier was open to all participants, and I think it would change in when I was expecting a more refined metagame. So anyways, there is the deck list, and I was able to finish first place of this deck list, and you're going to see a bunch of videos and everything here in the article covering. There's some replays, and I'll talk about a lot of my matches, and I hope you enjoy it, so stay tuned for that.